refers to the plane tragedy in India where 241 people died on June 12, 2025. Air India Flight 171, a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner flying from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick, crashed straight into the dormitory building of BJ Medical College just seconds after takeoff. The jet barely reached 625 feet before it lost all power, and the cockpit's desperate mayday call, "No thrust," echoed through the radio. Investigators raced to recover the black boxes, chasing clues of a rare twin-engine failure and the sudden deployment of the Ram air turbine. Now, after weeks of heartbreak and wild theories, scientists have finally solved the mystery, and what they found will leave you speechless. The afternoon of June 12, 2025 started just like any other day at Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport in Ahmedabad. Flight attendants were going through their usual routines, passengers were settling into their seats with books and phones, and Captain Ravi Singh was running through his pre-flight checks. Nobody in that busy terminal could have imagined that within the next few minutes, one of India's worst aviation disasters would unfold right above their heads. Air India Flight Sanjay 171 was supposed to be nothing more than a regular trip to London Gatwick. The plane was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, one of those sleek white aircraft that represent everything modern about flying today. Built in 2014, it had already completed over 5,000 flight hours on routes all around the world. This wasn't some old, tired airplane limping through its final year. Captain Singh had over 12,000 hours of flying experience, and his co-pilot Emily Jiao was known throughout the airline for being incredibly precise with the Dreamliner control. Together, they had flown this exact route many times before without any problems. The weather couldn't have been better for flying. Clear skies stretched as far as anyone could see, with just light winds and perfect visibility. When the morning maintenance crews had finished their checks, everything looked exactly as it should. The engines were running smoothly, the flaps were properly set, and all the landing gear was working perfectly. The weather report at 8:08 in the morning showed nothing but good conditions ahead. There was absolutely no reason to think that this flight would be anything other than routine. At exactly 1:38 in the afternoon local time, AI-71 lifted off from runway 23 with 241 people on board. Video cameras at the airport caught the beautiful white plane climbing steadily into the clear afternoon sky, looking exactly like thousands of other flights that take off every day around the world. For the first few hundred feet, everything appeared completely normal. Passengers were probably just starting to relax in their seats, maybe looking out the windows at the city shrinking below them. Then something went terribly wrong up there in the sky. People watching from the ground later described seeing the plane suddenly stop climbing, as if it had hit some kind of invisible wall in the air. The aircraft stalled, hanging motionless for what witnesses said felt like forever, before it started falling toward the earth. Air traffic controllers watching their radar screens saw the plane's signal climbing past 600 feet, then past 625 feet before it just vanished from their screens entirely. Inside the cockpit, Captain Singh and First Officer Xiao were fighting the most important battle of their lives. The last words anyone heard from AI-71 were a desperate mayday call that would haunt investigators for months afterward: "Mayday, mayday, no power." Those four simple words told the whole story. Both engines had somehow failed at the worst possible moment, right when the plane needed maximum power to climb away from the ground. The Boeing 787 dropped from the sky like a stone, its engines silent as it fell toward the BJ Medical College campus below. Students and teachers looked up in horror as the massive aircraft came down toward their hostel building. Some people ran for cover, others just stood there frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. Within seconds, the impossible became reality. The impact was absolutely devastating. The plane's belly smashed into the roof of the hostel building, sending chunks of concrete flying through the air like deadly missiles. The front section of the aircraft broke off completely as it slid across the courtyard, trapping passengers inside as the cabin split apart. Fuel tanks exploded on impact, and within moments the entire area was covered in flames that sent thick black smoke high into the clear sky. Emergency crews from both the airport and the city rushed to the scene, but what they found was beyond anything they had ever trained for. Twisted pieces of metal were scattered everywhere. Cars had been flipped over by the force of the crash, and the air was filled with the sounds of people crying and calling for help. Firefighters attacked the flames with special foam, desperately trying to keep the fire from spreading to other buildings where hundreds more students lived and studied. Medical teams quickly set up emergency treatment areas using stretchers brought from nearby hospitals, while other teams began the heartbreaking job of recovering bodies from the wreckage. The scene looked like something from a war zone. A modern airliner had been reduced to burned fragments. A college building was destroyed, and families around the world were about to get phone calls that would change their lives forever. But in the middle of all this horror, there was one story that seemed almost impossible to believe. Vishwash Kumar Romesh, a British citizen sitting in seat 11A, somehow managed to survive what should have been unsurvivable. When the plane broke apart on impact, Romesh found himself next to an emergency exit that became his only chance at life. He later said he felt the plane stall in the air for what seemed like several long seconds before the crash, with the cabin lights flashing green and white as the emergency systems kicked in. When the plane's body cracked open around him, Romesh managed to force open the exit door and jump into the chaos below. He burned his hand but avoided the deadly injuries that killed everyone else around him. His escape was later called a miracle by aviation experts, and his story would give investigators crucial information about what happened in those final moments. The human cost of this disaster was staggering. Along with the 241 people who died on the plane, 28 more lost their lives in the building that was hit. Among the victims were 169 Indian citizens, 53 British people, 7 Portuguese, 1 Canadian, and crew members from different countries around the world. The death of Vijay Rupani, who used to be the Chief Minister of Gujarat, sent shock waves through India's political community and made the public grief even more intense. One of the most heartbreaking stories to come out was about Hardikava and Vibhuti Patel, a young couple from Leicester in England who had just gotten engaged. Their dreams of a future together were destroyed just days after he had proposed to her. Their story, which was covered by newspapers around the world, came to represent the human cost of this tragedy: young lives cut short, families destroyed, and communities left to deal with sudden, senseless loss. News of the crash spread around the world within hours, causing an international response that showed just how seriously the aviation industry takes every major accident. Officials from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board and Federal Aviation Administration flew to Ahmedabad on June 15, bringing special equipment to recover the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder. These black boxes would hold the key to understanding what went wrong. Boeing executives, led by Stephanie Pope, who runs their commercial airplane division, held urgent meetings at Air India's headquarters in Gurugram to discuss what they were finding and coordinate their company's help with the investigation. GE Aerospace, which made the Dreamliner engines, also sent engineers to Ahmedabad. These international efforts were all aimed at putting together the final moments of AI-71 with the kind of thoroughness that only happens when the entire aviation industry knows that everyone's safety depends on learning from every accident. The technical investigation moved quickly by aviation standards. Investigators managed to get both the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder within just 28 hours, which was incredibly fast given how widely the pieces of the plane had scattered across the crash site. As experts began studying the cockpit conversations, engine performance data, and control inputs leading up to the accident, a disturbing picture started to emerge. The cockpit voice recorder slowly gave up its tragic secrets. That final mayday call captured the crew's frantic realization that their engines weren't producing the power they desperately needed to climb away from the ground. Aviation engineers studying the recording noticed something deeply troubling. They couldn't hear the normal whining sound that the engines make when they are working properly. This suggested that power was lost suddenly rather than gradually, something that could only happen if both engines lost fuel at the same time or if a critical part in the electronic engine control system failed completely. Early theories discussed by Air India chairman Natarajan Chandrasekaran suggested several possible causes, including engine power problems, wrong flap settings, or delayed landing gear retraction. But as investigators looked deeper, they began focusing on one particularly scary possibility, that both engines had failed at the same time, something so rare that most pilots never train for it because it's considered almost impossible. The investigation showed that AI-71's right engine had been replaced just 3 months before the crash. While routine engine changes are normal in commercial aviation and usually don't cause safety problems, investigators wanted to understand whether any maintenance mistakes or faulty parts might have played a role. They began looking at takeoff power settings, hydraulic line condition, and fuel pump systems, all things that could potentially cause the kind of total power loss that the crew reported in their final seconds. The response from aviation authorities was swift and unprecedented. India ordered that every Boeing 787 Dreamliner in the country, all 34 of them, had to undergo immediate special inspections. These weren't routine maintenance checks, but extensive examinations focusing specifically on the system suspected of playing a role in the Ahmedabad disaster. Civil Aviation Minister Ram Mohan Naidu said this intervention went far beyond normal procedures, requiring extended monitoring of the joints in the wings and automated power management systems. Regulators around the world quickly followed India's lead. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency and the US Federal Aviation Administration issued their own safety bulletins, urging airlines to examine engine control systems under practice emergency scenarios. Boeing, meanwhile, reduced its presence at the Paris Air Show to focus completely on the investigation, knowing that the entire 787 program's reputation was at stake. For the families of the victims, the technical investigation was important, but their immediate concerns were more basic: getting their loved ones home and finding some way to cope with their devastating loss. Air India and the Tata Group moved quickly to address these needs, announcing compensation that exceeded international standards. Families of the deceased were offered 1 crore rupees, about $120,000, each, with additional fast payments of 25 lakh rupees for immediate relief. Medical expenses for the injured, including the sole survivor, were covered completely, and the airline promised to rebuild the damaged section of BJ Medical College. Under the Montreal Convention, which governs international aviation liability, airlines face automatic responsibility of about $175,000 per passenger for proven damages, with unlimited liability possible where carelessness can be proven. Air India's willingness to exceed these baseline amounts reflected both the global attention on the crash and